Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Office Hours. I'm Stuart Newsom, and today we're talking about merging organizations without breaking the revenue cycle. As we all know, mergers and acquisitions may bring organizations together on paper, but operations don't automatically come together just because the transaction's closed. This is especially true in revenue cycle, where workflows, systems, reportings, payer processes, team expectations, cash flow, you name it, they all have to keep moving during that integration. So today we're going to talk about how leaders can approach integration thoughtfully, protect their continuity, so to speak, and avoid disrupting the business while change is happening, because you're basically building the plane while it's flying, if you understand that concept. I'm really excited to be joined today by Andrew Kuzmen, who's our Chief of Staff here at Infinix. Andrew brings a broad strategic and operational view to this conversation. He's actually lived it, got a few skint knees over it, probably worse. So he's going to help us unpack what leaders should think about when organizations come together and the revenue cycle has to keep moving. So Andrew, just thanks for joining us for Office Hours today. Just before we jump in, just wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of introduce yourself if you want to share a little bit about your role.
Yeah, absolutely. And Stuart, it's absolutely a pleasure joining you. I think the skin knees comment is probably the most accurate. I think holistically, I've been through over 50 M&A integrations today.
Wow.
Uh, and yeah, have seen all the successes, challenges, and lots of lessons learned by them. Uh, so yeah, my role really encompasses M&A integration, um, strategic deployment, so how we think about focused initiatives. But a broader sense, it's really all about operational excellence. How do you find areas to improve in your business? So excited to talk to us today.
Awesome. Well, this so glad to have you on. We should have had you on a long time ago, but yeah, so glad you're here with us today. So now, before we get into the questions, just want to have a quick reminder for everyone joining us live. Please submit your questions using the Q&A feature down below. We'll work those questions in as many as possible toward the end. And as always, I like to welcome comments. So if you have any insights or recommendations, or just want to say amen to what Andrew's saying, just go ahead and put that into the Q&A box. So with that, Andrew, you ready to dive in?
Absolutely.
Awesome, awesome. So the first question right out of the gate is, how do you broadly approach M&A integration? So that's a pretty broad question, but yeah, how would you handle that?
I'd agree with your amen there. I think from a lessons learned standpoint, you can really put this in a priority process. And if you think about M&A integration, mostly your objectives is to build enterprise value. Well, how do you do that? Well, you got to protect the underlying business first. I think a lot of folks will jump to straight integration or merging operating models. But if you're really not taking the time to first understand the business and make sure you're not interrupting what's running today, you can make a lot of mistakes. So I'd say first, protect the business. Second, understand before standardizing. And that's a big concept for a lot of folks. So if you think of, hey, standardizing is important, but if you standardize too quickly, you might accidentally break something that was working without fully understanding why it worked. There's an expression we used to use in my past life called go to Gemba. And Gemba essentially means where the work's getting done. And the idea behind this is, look, if you're looking at a company or an operation from, you say, ivory tower or an investment bank, and you're not there on the floor truly understanding operations, you're not going to really understand it. So taking that time to go to Gemba. And then finally, integration is an operating model exercise. The bigger challenge is really aligning people, processes, reporting, accountability, and the decision making model overall.
Gotcha. And that's that last phrase you mentioned people.
Yep.
So how do you manage the people side, of integrations?
That is a great question. That is actually the right question, I would say. I mean, when you think of integration, it's more than just a checklist of things you have to do. It's a transition. Teams are learning new workflows. They're moving away from old operating models. They go through a period of uncertainty. They begin a new way of working, and eventually it becomes the new normal. We actually brought someone in to our organization, Mimi, who brought a framework that helped us through this or helped us think through this. You have an ending. You have an acknowledgement of loss where familiar ways of working stop and you have to clarify what continues. Then you go through this morphing phase where there's uncertainty and there's chaos. Then all of a sudden you start kind of the new beginnings. The team starts to see clarity and renewed confidence in the organization. And finally, once you're through it, you get to that full scale change attainment, and that really becomes the new operating model. And that's where you start to see success.
Awesome, awesome. So yeah, because people's the main drive, obviously. You can have processes and different systems, maybe different EHRs, all those things are challenging. Probably the most challenging and the most important are the people for sure.
Uh,
Um, so when organizations go through a merger or an acquisition, what are some of the first revenue cycle issues that tend to surface?
Yeah, I think it gets back to some of the comments you made. There's different workflows, handoffs, role ownerships. It's the same core work, but it's handled differently. And you see stuff like inconsistencies in reporting, metrics. Well, we might think that metric means the same thing. A lot of times you find there's separate definitions. And there's ultimately risk. There's cash flow risk, there's AR, denials, unbilled accounts, claims, collections that can all fall into place.
Yeah, I know. And you mentioned, just some of the nuances. I'm sure there's a lot of nuances involved in that too. We might be talking about that a little later, but you mentioned naming conventions. That's so important, because we're talking about different cultures. You're trying to merge your cultures, and and each culture has its own language, how it likes to communicate, and so that can be very disruptive, and it's really hard to manage that sometimes. And people just don't understand the challenges. It's more than just dollar signs and making sure people are on their HR, which those are challenges too. But it's most definitely, how do you get two cultures to merge together and resonate, right? Um, so why does revenue cycle integration often become more complicated than leaders expect? I'm sure there's a level of expectation, right? Because when I was thinking about this session, I was going, yeah, there's a lot of RCM companies out there. The best way to expand their business is to add a line of business that they currently don't do. Either create it yourself and build it yourself, or merge or acquire someone else who already has it, right? And so that's kind of the easiest way to go forward. And so leadership has expectations of, okay, we're going to bring this on and we're going to get rolling and we're going to add this line of business. But sometimes that's not the case, right?
I couldn't agree with you more there. And I think, look, the local matters, local relationships matter, way of doing things matters. There's a reason why these companies were successful. I mean, if you think of RCM in general, it's deeply operational. It touches patients, it touches providers, systems, vendors. So people might ultimately do the same work, but they're going to manage it in very different ways. And understanding there's manual workarounds and local knowledge that matters.
Right, right. So when you're looking at that from a standpoint, what are the biggest risks when teams try to standardize workflows too quickly? Because I know there's like this finish line, if you will, and people want to get it done quickly, and they want it all to work together. I'm probably I don't want to steal any of your thunder, but it's like you have like HIPAA and security,
Sure.
cybersecurity. That's one aspect. You have all these systems and you have workflows. I mean, everything that we've been talking about, and it's like, oh, let's just get it done as fast as possible. Um, why is that such the biggest risk?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if you go in there and you break something and you don't understand what you break, you're going to affect cash flow. You're going to create confusion. Who owns things? What's the handoff, escalation pass? And what ultimately happens, and this is the scary part, is you lose good people. And the result of that is you see in the results, you see denials, you see slow AR follow up. But most importantly, and I think to your point about that local knowledge is you lose institutional knowledge about how these things are working.
Right, right, exactly. And it's I think also the timing would probably matter,
Absolutely.
because you may be in the middle of a fiscal year, maybe in the middle of, what's the season going on, not just from an RCM business standpoint, but, is it during the holiday season? Is it during the summer? And it's, and people are used to doing things a certain way.
Yep.
Um, so all that has to come together, and that transition can be delayed also from the standpoint of each entity has its own set of customers. How the customer is going to relate, to that. So yeah, it can be an issue.
Just
Um,
comment on that. You couldn't be more right. I mean, if you think of an area like Louisiana, if you're trying to do something around Mardi Gras, you're going to have a little bit of a challenge. If you don't understand local norms, customers, interactions, how the relationships matter, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot ultimately.
Absolutely. Well, looking back at all these things that we've kind of talked
Yeah.
about so far, how should leaders think about balancing consistency, like that standardization, kind of get into a rhythm, I guess, is another way to put it, with preserving what is already working
Yeah.
inside each organization. Because I know the first thing it never fails. You walk in, you go, okay, we're going to change everything because it needs improving. Well, what attracted you to this company to begin with that
Yes.
makes you want to improve it? So I'll be quiet and let you speak to that.
No, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, what are the unique pieces that that company runs? Where can you preserve strong local practices until really the data tells you there's a better way to do it? I think it all starts with outcomes, though. I mean, what are those focus KPIs that really matter for the customers? And I think if you start with the customer first and then work backwards, you're going to be in a better position. Is it cash, clean claims, denial prevention, and then creating the accountability just around those KPIs? I mean, standardization is great, but standard creation creates risk. So the more you understand kind of how they're performing, it actually allows you to say, what do you, does it make sense to change a process or does it make sense to standardize it based on, are you seeing struggle in a certain area from a customer perspective?
Yeah, and it just popped another thought in my head as you were saying that, because as these mergers and acquisitions occur, obviously, um, the organization is getting larger and larger and larger and adding more people with each one of them with cultural differences. Maybe they have some biases on how work should be done. That can be a problem as well because now you have to manage. You may have had, a couple hundred employees, and now you're jumping to over 1,000 plus employees. That's a big leap. But if you're a company like Infinix with over 9,000 employees now, and I've been here 2.5 years, and when I started, we had roughly about, I think, 4 or 5,000 employees. So just in that when span, we've kind of doubled.
Yep.
Um, and that's been challenging. I think we've done very well, with that. Could we do better? Probably. But yeah, that thought came to my mind. It's like, yeah, because as you grow, you know, be careful what you ask for, I guess, right?
Stuart, I couldn't agree more with you for that. And in fact, that was my morning this morning. We were talking with the LT team. We were talking about how do you create that organizational culture? How do you blend these cultures? How do you learn from where you're acquiring? Because if you're just coming in and saying, this is our culture, this is our way of operating, this is now how you're going to operate, what did you buy? Or you want to accept the level of reluctance. No, you bring people along, you listen, you understand what works, what best practices you can incorporate, and then make sure you blend the two. You can have
Right.
organizational culture and you can have local culture as well.
Right, right. Because sometimes the buying company, kind of has more resources than the company that's being acquired. So the trade-off is you definitely don't want to change everything for the company that's being acquired because what they were doing was they were doing right for some reason because they were successful enough for you to have interest in buying them. But at the same time, the acquiring company has to realize, hey, this company is going to help us grow. They have more resources than we did to go to scale. So it is kind of give and take on both sides. And sometimes both sides can kind of butt heads, so to speak. So I know remedying that can be challenging.
I think that's the absolute right way, and I think if you go into an acquisition saying, "Here's why we bought the company," or "Here's what we want to do with it," and then you go through that process of really kind of understanding it, stabilize, make sure you don't break anything, understanding it, and then get that optimization. That's where it's going to help. People are going to accept it more. They're going to be part
Right.
of the solution. You're going to bring them along. You're not going to force stuff down their throat.
Right. Right. Exactly. Because hey, we all know people. If you try and force something on them, there's going to be resistance.
That's just
Right. So, where do technology and reporting create the most friction during an RCM integration?
I mean, you touched on it earlier. Metric definition, standardization of terms, a lot of reporting challenges you see. Data reconciliation, I think, is one of the biggest challenges a lot of folks see. And
Right.
yeah, you find, yeah, when you look at systems and you look at the actual processes they use and the technology stack, a lot of times you find manual processes, you find spreadsheets outside of it, and trying to get to that standardization of definition and standardization of where that data actually lives, I think is the big initial challenge or discovery a lot of folks find.
Yeah, and converting data conversion,
Yep.
um, it's tricky. It's it's tricky, and it's if you don't get that right, oh, and then you got to start over. There's just um, yeah, and there's always something you didn't think of, right? You can plan out the best of the best and have everything the way you think it should be, and you've consulted with 2 dozen people in leadership, and then boom, there's usually one or two things that no one ever thought of or saw coming. It's going to be the wrench thrown into it, right?
It's back to those scrape knees. You got to be prepared and you got to be adaptable for when stuff like that comes up.
Right, right, right. So I guess w- what questions should healthcare leaders ask of their internal teams or even their external partners before bringing revenue cycle operations together? So this is kind of a question of doing your homework, I guess, before you consider, hey, I think we should be in this line of business. Here's the company's doing great. We're going to make them an offer, see if they're interested, in joining us.
Mm. Yeah, great question. I think it goes along with a lot of the same themes. It's understand the company, understand where is that work being done today, what systems is it being done to, by whom, where. Understand that. Really define kind of operationally how it works. Where are the biggest cash flow? You see an AR deniables, backlog risk, and then ultimately we got to decide is what do you not change, and what needs to be stabilized before you can optimize it.
Mm, yeah, exactly, exactly. So I guess, it's impossible to put everything in this short segment that we're doing, on this, but these are definitely some of the high points. But I guess in a general way, kind of, throwing this last question out to you before we get to the audience questions, but what would be one takeaway or one piece of advice that you would give for anyone that's going through a merger or acquisition? What would your advice be to them?
Understand it's people, stabilize first, standardize second, optimize third.
Gotcha. Seems simple.
And be adaptable. You're going to learn things you did not expect, and you got to understand that a playbook, a tool set, that's what it is. It's a tool set, and you're going to learn things from it. And I'm a big believer in continuous improvement. If you're not learning, you're not accepting where you fail and where you fall down, you're never going to get
Right.
better.
Right. Exactly. There's no doubt about that. Um, well, that's all the questions that I have. And but we are going to move to some audience questions. And let's see if I can look here. Yeah, I don't really. Let's see. Oh yeah, here's one. So how do you know when it's time to standardize workflows versus allowing different teams or locations to keep their existing processes?
I think it ties back to a lot of the points we said, and that's a great question. It's Look at KPIs. Like once you can standardize your metrics and once you understand where the data source is, and then you can get to a standard that you agree on, look at it and see how it's performing. If it is massively red or it's underperforming, that's going to be an area you're going to have to go in and make changes. If it's working, then you might preserve how it's been working. It's nothing you need to change today. And I think that's part of the challenge folks have is they go in thinking they have to fix everything at once and they've got the perfect way of operating, but you got to acknowledge what you can change and the pace of change. And if you do that based on looking at what affects your customers, ultimately what our job is, then you're going to be in a much better position. And for the organization, it's good to align on that. If you're aligning on those customer outcomes, then the team itself are going to know what to work on, what not to work on, and where we can kind of pace things in.
Right, because it always takes longer than you think, right?
Absolutely.
And even when you plan on it taking a good while, and being intentional about that. So it's, that's one thing I've learned too. It always takes a little longer than you think. It's almost like when you're remodeling your house and someone says, "Oh, it's going to take 2 weeks." Just add another month.
So you take out that drywall and you look behind it and you find out there's knob and tube, and you got to start rewiring. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So there is another audience question. Um, so what is one area of the revenue cycle that organizations often underestimate during a merger or acquisition? That's a good one.
That's a great question. I mean, we mentioned reporting. Reporting is always a challenge. You got to align metrics. You got to do all that. Uh, there's the change element of it. It's the physical change. You got to take people through this process. You got to understand what does good look like in the end, and the people matter. But I think the most important thing is it's the frontline knowledge. It's the people who do this work on a day to day basis, and they're going to truly understand where the risk lives.
Yeah. And they have the relationships,
Yep.
with the people because it is all about, the customer, these providers, helping to protect their revenue, especially in the RCM space. And, I think having great relationships is so key. The connections that you make can live well beyond, the business that you're doing today. I know I have several that I've started doing business with several years ago, and I have nothing to do with them anymore, but they're still good friends. And, I think that's the big takeaway. It's just like we started off saying it's all about the people when our context was about the people in the organization, but it's also about the people in the clients that are served. They're and are going to benefit from this merger and acquisition.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think there's a cultural value to look at, and in some of the organization that it's do the right thing and do the right thing for our team members, do the right thing for our customers, and just do the right thing ethically overall.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I think that's a great place to close. The big theme that I heard today, Andrew, is that integration has to be intentional. Day one is not the finish line. It's just the start of the operational work, as you put or said earlier. And also, organizations have to understand that the current state, protect cash flow, listen to the teams closest to the work, and then sequence the change very carefully. And I like the term sequence. So, Andrew, just want to thank you for joining us and sharing your perspective. Hope you had fun and you'll come back.
Absolutely, Stuart. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank
Yes, absolutely. And well, thanks to everyone else who joined us today for this episode of Office Hours. Be sure to catch our Revenue Cycle Optimized podcast, as well as visit our website at infinix.com for more articles, case studies, and insights on all things revenue cycle. And it's not too late. We are doing a thought leadership executive forum in Chicago, Illinois, July 28th through the 30th. If this interests you, it is an invite only, but you can contact us and request an invite. We'd be happy to talk to you about your attendance there. This is not going to be a normal conference, or yes, we are going to have some slides. What conference isn't a good conference without some slides? But it's going to be very collaborative. It's going to be a lot of listening instead of just lecturing. is the way I like to put it. So show up, contribute, you get to contribute, and we can walk away with hopefully some answers regarding revenue cycle pains. So hope to see you there, and we'll see you next time on Office Hours.